The train's whistle cut through the crisp morning air like a blade through silk, and Thomas McKenna felt his heart hammer against his ribs. His left leg, twisted from a childhood fall that never healed properly, ached with the cold as he gripped his walking stick and prepared to step onto the platform. The letter in his coat pocket, worn soft from countless readings, promised a new beginning. A woman named Catherine who needed a husband, and he who needed hope. Through the window he caught sight of her. Golden hair pinned beneath a blue bonnet, hands clasped nervously at her waist. She was everything the letters had described, and more beautiful than he had dared imagine. The moment stretched like honey in winter as the train shuddered to a stop. Thomas stepped down carefully, his uneven gait more pronounced with nerves. Catherine's eyes found his face first, lighting with recognition and something that might have been relief. Then her gaze dropped to his leg, to the walking stick, to the way he favored his right side. The light in her eyes died like a candle snuffed by wind. As snow begins to fall in this story, I wonder where in the world you're listening from and what the weather is like in your corner of today. Her step backward was small but devastating. Thomas had seen that look before, the mixture of pity and revulsion that people tried to hide but never quite managed. He had traveled 800 miles for this moment, spent his last dollars on the train fare and a decent coat. Now he stood on a platform in Colorado territory, watching his future crumble like autumn leaves. Catherine's voice carried across the platform like glass breaking. "I cannot do this," she said to the older woman beside her, her words sharp with panic. "This is not what we agreed upon." The older woman, likely her mother, nodded grimly and took Catherine's arm, steering her toward a waiting carriage without so much as a glance at Thomas. From the mercantile doorway, Sarah Whitmore watched the scene unfold with growing indignation. At 23, she had witnessed enough cruelty in Copper Ridge to recognize it in all its forms. The man stood alone now, snow gathering on his dark coat shoulders, his face a careful mask that could not quite hide the devastation beneath. Sarah had come to town for supplies, not to involve herself in strangers' heartbreak. But something in the way he straightened his shoulders, the dignity he maintained even as his world collapsed, stirred something fierce in her chest. She had always been drawn to wounded things, much to her father's despair. Her boots crunched through the snow as she approached him. The sound made him turn, and she saw eyes the color of storm clouds, intelligent and kind despite their current pain. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You look like you could use a hot meal and somewhere warm to sit for a spell." Thomas stared at her as if she were a mirage. Young and plain-spoken, with brown hair escaping its braid and eyes that held no pity, only practical kindness. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I appreciate the gesture, but I have no money for meals." Sarah smiled then, the first genuine warmth he had felt since leaving Kansas. "Good thing I was not planning to charge you then," she replied. The diner's warmth enveloped them like an embrace as Sarah led Thomas to a corner table. Steam rose from bowls of beef stew while the proprietor, Mrs. Henderson, cast curious glances their way. Small towns thrived on gossip, and Sarah knew tongues would be wagging before they finished their meal. Thomas moved carefully, his walking stick tapping against the wooden floor. Sarah pretended not to notice how he positioned himself so his weaker leg was hidden beneath the table, or how his hands trembled slightly as he removed his hat. Pride, she recognized, was sometimes all a person had left. "I run a small farm outside town," Sarah said, stirring honey into her coffee. "My father passed last spring, left me the land and more work than one person can handle." She studied his face as she spoke, noting how he listened with complete attention, as if her words were precious things to be treasured. Thomas cleared his throat. "Miss, I am grateful for your kindness, but I should be honest about my circumstances. The lady at the station was to be my wife. We had corresponded for months, made arrangements." He gestured toward his leg. "She was not expecting someone like me." Sarah's coffee cup clinked against the saucer. "Someone like you?" she repeated, and there was steel beneath her gentle tone. "You mean someone who traveled 800 miles to honor his word? Someone who speaks with courtesy and intelligence?" Her eyes flashed. "If she could not see past your leg to the man you are, then she was not worthy of you." The words hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Sarah's farm sat nestled in a valley where the mountains cradled the sky like gentle hands. The cabin was modest but well-built, with a stone chimney that promised warmth and windows that caught the afternoon light. Thomas surveyed the property with the eye of a man who understood hard work, noting the sagging fence posts and the barn door that hung askew. You were not exaggerating about needing help, he said, leaning against his walking stick as Sarah unhitched her horse from the wagon. Sarah followed his gaze and sighed. Father always said he would fix things come spring. Then spring came and went, and he with it. She brushed snow from her coat. I have been learning as I go, but there is only so much one person can manage. Thomas hobbled toward the barn, examining the broken hinge with practiced fingers. I worked as a carpenter back in Kansas, he said quietly, before the accident that cost me steady work. His hands traced the wood grain with reverence. This is good timber, just needs the right attention. Sarah watched him work, noting how his disability seemed to disappear when he focused on a task. His movements were deliberate, economical, born of necessity rather than limitation. There was something beautiful in the way he approached problems, finding solutions where others might see only obstacles. The wind picked up, whistling through the gaps in the barn walls. Thomas looked up at the darkening sky. Storms coming in fast, he observed. You might want to get the animals secured. In that moment, Sarah realized she had not brought home a burden, but a blessing wrapped in unexpected packaging. 3 weeks had passed since Thomas arrived, and the farm bore witness to his quiet transformation. The barn door hung straight and true, the fence post stood soldier straight against the wind, and the chicken coop no longer leaked when it rained. Each morning, Sarah woke to the sound of his hammer or saw, steady rhythms that spoke of purpose and belonging. Thomas had fashioned himself a small workshop in the corner of the barn, where he crafted furniture with an artisan's touch. His hands, gnarled from years of work, moved with surprising grace as he shaped wood into beauty. Sarah often found excuses to linger nearby, watching him work while pretending to tend the animals. While our characters find warmth by the fire tonight, I would love to know what time it is where you are, and what is keeping you cozy in your corner of the world. The evening ritual had become precious to them both. After supper, they would sit by the fire, Sarah mending clothes while Thomas carved small figures from scraps of wood. Tonight, he handed her a delicate wooden bird, its wings spread as if caught mid-flight. It is beautiful, Sarah whispered, running her fingers over the smooth curves. You have gifted hands. Thomas's cheeks colored. My mother used to say that God gives everyone something special, even if the world cannot always see it. His voice dropped. I thought I had lost my purpose when I could no longer do heavy labor. Sarah looked up from the wooden bird. Perhaps you did not lose your purpose, she said softly. Perhaps you just had not found the right place to use it yet. The first visitors arrived on a Tuesday morning when frost still painted the windows silver. Sarah's sister Margaret stepped down from her buggy with the careful precision of someone delivering unwelcome news, her husband Harold trailing behind like a reluctant shadow. Margaret's eyes swept the farm, taking inventory of the improvements with barely concealed surprise. The place looks well maintained, she admitted grudgingly, then fixed her gaze on Thomas as he emerged from the barn. Though I hear you have taken in a stranger. Thomas removed his hat respectfully, his uneven gait more pronounced under scrutiny. Ma'am, he said simply, offering a slight bow. Margaret's expression hardened as she noted his walking stick. Sarah, we need to speak privately. Her tone brooked no argument, the same voice she had used when they were children and she was appointed keeper of propriety. Inside the cabin, Margaret paced like a caged cat while Harold stood by the door, clearly wishing himself elsewhere. People are talking, Sarah. A young woman living alone with a man, no matter how incapacitated he might be. It reflects poorly on our family name. Sarah's hands stilled on the tea service. He has been nothing but respectful and helpful. More helpful than most able-bodied men I know. Margaret snorted. Helpful or not, appearances matter. What will people think? What will they say when you need to find a real husband? The words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire, acrid and suffocating. That evening, Thomas sat at his workbench longer than usual, his hands idle for the first time since arriving. Sarah found him there when she came to check on the animals, moonlight streaming through the barn windows and casting silver shadows across his face. You heard what she said, he spoke without looking up, his voice carrying the weight of old wounds reopened. Sarah stepped closer, her boots crunching on scattered wood shavings. I heard what she said. I also heard what she did not say, which is that this farm has never been better maintained or more prosperous. Thomas finally met her eyes, and she saw something there that made her heart ache. A lifetime of being measured and found wanting, of being seen as less than whole. Sarah, you have been kinder to me than I had any right to expect. But your sister is not wrong about appearances. Sarah sank onto a wooden stool beside his workbench. When I was 16, she said quietly, I was engaged to be married. Robert Hartley, the banker's son. Everyone said it was a perfect match. She picked up one of his carving tools, turning it over in her hands. But Robert wanted a decoration, not a partner. Someone to sit quietly in his parlor and bear his children without having opinions of her own. This quiet mountain valley feels so peaceful tonight, and I would love to know where you are enjoying this story from, and whether it is day or night in your part of the world. I broke the engagement 3 days before the wedding, Sarah continued. This town has a long memory for such scandals. The storm that had been building all week finally broke on Friday, bringing with it winds that howled like banshees and snow that fell in sheets so thick the barn disappeared from view. Sarah and Thomas huddled in the cabin, listening to the tempest rage outside while the fire crackled bravely in the hearth. Thomas whittled by lamplight, his latest creation taking shape under careful fingers. A horse this time, wild and free with its mane flowing in an imagined wind. Sarah watched him work, mesmerized by the way he could see beauty hidden in a simple piece of wood and coax it into existence. You never married, she said suddenly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. His hands stilled. No, there was a woman once back in Kansas. Mary Henderson. We were planning to wed after harvest season. His voice grew quiet. The accident happened in August. She visited me once in the hospital, took one look at my leg, and never came back. Sarah felt anger rise in her chest like steam from a kettle. She was a fool. Thomas set down his carving knife and looked at her directly. Was she? I cannot provide for a family the way other men can. I cannot dance at community gatherings or ride alongside other husbands. I am not whole, Sarah. You are the most whole person I have ever known, she said fiercely. You see solutions where others see problems. You create beauty from scraps. You treat everyone with dignity and kindness. Her voice broke slightly. If that is not whole, then I do not know what is. The morning after the storm dawned clear and brilliant. The world transformed into a crystal palace of ice and snow. But their peaceful sanctuary was shattered when Harold arrived on horseback, his face grim with urgency and something that looked like shame. Sarah, he called as he dismounted, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. We need Thomas. There has been an accident at the lumber mill. Thomas emerged from the barn, already reaching for his coat. What happened? A beam collapsed, Harold explained, his eyes avoiding Thomas directly. 3 men are trapped underneath. We have tried everything, but the weight is too much. Someone mentioned you might know about leverage and pulleys from your carpentry work. Sarah watched Thomas transform before her eyes. The careful, cautious man who moved through the world apologizing for taking up space vanished, replaced by someone with purpose blazing in his storm-gray eyes. He gathered tools with swift efficiency, his disability forgotten in the face of urgent need. At the mill, chaos reigned. Men stood helplessly around the massive beam that had pinned Jake Morrison, Pete Sullivan, and young Danny Fletcher beneath its crushing weight. Thomas surveyed the scene with the calculating gaze of an engineer, his mind working through possibilities while others wrung their hands. We need a fulcrum here, he said, pointing to a spot near the beam's center, and rope rigged through that pulley system there. His voice carried absolute authority. Give me 10 minutes and I can have them free. The same men who had whispered about his worthiness now hung on his every word. Thomas's makeshift pulley system groaned under the massive weight as every able-bodied man in Copper Ridge threw their strength behind the ropes. Inch by agonizing inch, the beam began to rise. Thomas positioned himself at the fulcrum point, his bad leg braced against a wooden post, using his intimate knowledge of leverage to guide the operation. Easy now, he called out, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. Keep the tension steady. Jake, can you hear me? A weak voice answered from beneath the beam. Still here, Thomas. Getting mighty tired of this view, though. Sarah held her breath as the trapped men were carefully pulled free one by one. Jake Morrison's leg was clearly broken. Pete Sullivan bore a gash across his forehead. But young Danny Fletcher stood and walked away under his own power. The crowd erupted in cheers and grateful shouts. Dr. Henley arrived to tend the wounded, but his first words were for Thomas. Brilliant work, son. Without your quick thinking, we would have had 3 funerals instead of 2 recoveries. As the excitement died down and the injured were taken away, Sarah found herself surrounded by the very people who had whispered about her arrangement with Thomas. Mrs. Peterson, the town's most notorious gossip, approached with tears in her eyes. Miss Whitmore, she said quietly, I owe you and Mr. McKenna an apology. I see now what kind of man you have welcomed into your home. The town is grateful beyond words. Sometimes it takes a moment of crisis to reveal the beauty that was always there, waiting to be noticed. That evening, as golden lamplight filled the cabin and the fire settled into glowing embers, Thomas and Sarah sat closer than ever before. The events at the mill had changed something fundamental between them, as if a wall neither had acknowledged had finally crumbled to dust. "Sarah," Thomas said quietly, his hands still bearing traces of sawdust and rope burns from the rescue. "I need to tell you something that has been weighing on my heart." She set down her mending and turned to face him fully, noting how the firelight caught the silver threading through his dark hair, how his eyes held a vulnerability that made her breath catch. "When I came here, I was a broken man," he continued, "not just in body but in spirit. I had convinced myself that I had nothing to offer anyone, that my best days were behind me." His voice grew stronger. "But you saw something in me that I had forgotten existed." Sarah reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his calloused ones. "You were never broken, Thomas. You were just waiting for the right place to bloom." He lifted their joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I love you, Sarah Whitmore, not out of gratitude or convenience, but because you are the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever known." His eyes searched hers. "If you would have me, truly have me, I would be honored to call you my wife." The wooden bird he had carved for her weeks ago sat on the mantelpiece, its wings forever spread in flight, a symbol of dreams taking wing. Spring arrived early that year, painting the valley in shades of hope and new beginnings. The wedding took place in the cabin where their love had grown, with Reverend Matthews officiating and the entire town of Copper Ridge in attendance. Even Margaret had come, bringing with her a grudging respect and a quilt she had sewn as a wedding gift. Thomas stood beside Sarah in his best suit, the one he had worn on that fateful train journey months ago. But this time, his walking stick seemed less like a burden and more like part of the man the community had come to love and respect. When he spoke his vows, his voice carried across the room with quiet strength. "I promise to love you not despite our differences, but because of them," he said, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "To build a life with you where kindness matters more than appearances, where love is measured not by what we lack, but by what we give." Sarah's own vows brought tears to many eyes. "You taught me that true strength comes not from never falling, but from rising each time with grace. You showed me that the heart sees what the eyes cannot." As snow falls gently in this final chapter, I am so grateful you joined us for this journey of love conquering all, and I would love to know where in the world you experienced this story with us today. After the ceremony, as guests enjoyed cake and cider, Jake Morrison approached Thomas with a proposal. The town needed a new mill foreman, someone with engineering knowledge and problem-solving skills. The job was his if he wanted it. Thomas looked at Sarah, who smiled and nodded. They had found their place at last, in a community that valued them for who they truly were.